My name is Andreas, and I'm presenting our work on digital comprehensibility assessment of simplified texts among persons with intellectual disabilities. Text simplification is the process of reducing the complexity of a text to make it easier to understand for a wide audience. Primary target groups of simplified texts include persons with intellectual disabilities, prelingually deaf persons, persons with dementia, non-native speakers, and others. In natural language processing, automatic text simplification is an increasingly popular task where we try to automate this process using machine learning techniques. Here you can see an example from a text simplification dataset where a complex sentence is split into two simpler sentences and simpler words are used to reduce lexical and syntactic complexity. For evaluating the output of text simplification models, human evaluation is generally the preferred approach. Usually, this is done by employing crowdworkers or experts and having them rate the simplified texts on a linear scale, for example, in terms of their simplicity. This approach is problematic because it is not representative of the primary target groups of simplified language and because it does not measure actual comprehension. Ideally, we would like to be able to measure how well, for example, persons with intellectual disabilities can understand the texts. In our study, we wanted to include the target group of persons with intellectual disabilities, and in addition to subjective ratings, we also wanted to conduct more objective comprehension testing and measure reading behavior. However, this is quite difficult to do, since crowdsourcing platforms are not accessible enough for these user groups, and administering in-person guided experiment sessions is very time-consuming. But more and more persons with intellectual disabilities are becoming digital natives, and many of them use mobile phones and tablet devices on a daily basis. This makes it easier to include them in evaluation studies. We already developed and tested a mobile application for comprehensibility assessment in a previous publication. We designed the interface in a way that is easy to understand and use for users with intellectual disabilities. The instructions are included in the app, so participants can go through the experiment at their own pace. This means that they were able to use the app independently, which allowed us to have sessions with several participants at the same time. For our study, we selected 12 texts from a corpus created by a provider of German text simplification services. The texts had already been simplified manually by professional translators. In addition, we used a fine-tuned transformer model to automatically simplify the texts, resulting in a total of 3 text versions for each of the 12 documents: the original, the manually simplified, and the automatically simplified version. For each document, we created 4 multiple-choice comprehension questions, and we used the same questions for all 3 text versions in order to measure and compare the comprehensibility between the different versions. We recruited 18 participants with intellectual disabilities between the ages of 18 and 32 from an educational program. For comparison, we also recruited a control group of 18 persons without intellectual disabilities. Each participant took part in 3 sessions. The sessions with the target group included up to 5 participants at the same time and up to 12 participants for the control group. Each participant completed 12 reading tasks, which involved reading a text and answering questions. The study also involved 4 cognitive tasks, which we used to compare working memory, reaction time, visual attention, and other cognitive skills between the 2 groups. The procedure for the reading tasks was as follows. First, only the text was displayed, and the participants were asked to read the text. During this, we recorded their reading time and scrolling interactions. Next, participants had to rate the text in terms of absolute difficulty. Then the text was shown again, this time with the comprehension questions. Apart from their responses, we also measured the time they took to answer each question. With this setup, we were able to measure comprehension from several different perspectives. We measured subjective difficulty based on the ratings, which we analyzed using a logistic graded response model. We also measured objective comprehension based on the accuracy of the comprehension question responses by fitting one-parameter logistic item response models, also known as RASH models. And we collected behavioral measurements, namely response time and reading speed, which can be considered proxies for difficulty or comprehension. Here we used log linear regression models. We analyzed these measurements separately for the target and control group to reveal the differences between the two groups. The results show that in terms of response accuracy of the comprehension questions, the manually simplified texts were more comprehensible for both groups. Interestingly, automatic simplification actually slightly impaired comprehension in the control group, but not in the target group. The same observation can also be made by looking at the response times. The more comprehensible the texts were, the faster participants answered the questions. Looking at the perceived difficulty ratings, there are even more remarkable differences between the two groups. The automatically simplified texts were rated easier than the original by the target group, but not by the control group. In contrast, the control group rated the manual simplification much easier. The reading speed measurements also revealed some interesting differences. As expected, the control group generally read the manually simplified texts more quickly. However, the target group actually tended to read the original texts more quickly. Taking a closer look at these results, we noticed that some participants in the target group exhibited some unusually high reading speeds, indicating that they only skimmed or skipped some of the texts, possibly because they were too difficult for them. So what do these results tell us? First, we found that comprehension questions are more reliable than perceived difficulty ratings, especially with the target group of persons with intellectual disabilities. We also found that automatic simplification, which can sometimes be noisy, affects the perception of difficulty differently for different user groups. Measuring reading speed additionally revealed differences in reading behavior between the two groups. And finally, digital comprehensibility assessment using a mobile app can help in conducting more inclusive and comprehensive evaluation studies with target groups. Thank you for your attention.